All right, I think we're good. All right. So I kind of want to define the difference at this point in the class, the difference between mental health and mental illness. And the best analogy that we can use is its closest cousin. It's part of it, and that's the difference between physical health. Oh, settle down, mouse. The difference between physical health and physical disorders or physical disease. Okay. We can have very poor physical health. We can eat the wrong foods. We cannot exercise. We cannot, do all those health checkup stuff that we're supposed to be doing. We can do all of those things, but that doesn't necessarily mean that we have a physical disorder like diabetes or heart disease or something like that. Does it increase our chances? Absolutely. But we can also be of perfect physical health and still, even though it's a lower probability, still end up with a heart attack or diabetes or the like. And I just want to make that really clear. Now, just like physical health doesn't impact our ability, yeah, sure. So we can become limited in what we can do because of our health and because of our lifestyle, that it makes it so maybe we can't go hiking or running or those kinds of things. So poor physical health does influence our ability to kind of exist in the world. Okay. Mental health is the same thing. We can have really, really, really poor mental health, meaning that we don't take care of our social relationships. We are maybe are negative or narcissistic in our thinking ways, or negative thinking, and we may not take care of our mental and emotional worlds as we should. Okay. But that doesn't mean that we have a mental illness or a mental disorder. That, again, sets us up for a higher probability of having a mental illness, but it doesn't necessarily mean you have a mental illness. A good example of this is mass shooters and school shooters. Most do not have a diagnosable mental disorder, but they do suffer from mental health issues such as bullying and harassment and disengagement from family, rejection, and all of those things that result in poor mental health. Okay. And I just want to make those distinctions at this point because there's always this stigma that if you do something criminal or you do something like that, you're mentally ill or you have a mental disease, and that's not necessarily true. Okay. Now, what we want to look at is how does identity and loneliness influence our mental health, and that's kind of where we're going. We're also going to look at how it influences our physical health as well. Okay. So I want to kind of rehearse a study because, as I proposed, loneliness isn't just someone not physically being there. What can create loneliness? And we'll see that in this study, it kind of answers why here in the United States we partly suffer from loneliness and a lot of times poor mental health. Okay. So we're going to look at the two types of loneliness, social loneliness and emotional loneliness. Okay. And for now, just to simplify things, we're going to ignore these two groups right here because these are what we call control groups. And what a control group is it assures our experiment is measuring something beyond what you would normally see in a given society. What these two groups do is they set up our baseline, meaning that if I gave the class a measure of loneliness our average would probably be just right around this green and this blue line. The two situations that we're really interested in are these two experimental conditions, one called the social identity condition, the other one called the personal identity condition, okay? And we're actually going to have people reflect on very positive things, not negative things, but positive things. And so in the first run of the experiments, and we did several identities after this, including cultural identity later on in the studies, and the like, but to kind of keep things simple, in our first run of it, we used college students, okay? And so this is what I mean by positive, okay? In the social identity situation, we simply asked, what are 5 positive things about being a college student? Okay. And in the personal identity, we simply asked, what are 5 positive qualities that make you partly about who you are? And what are some positive things? And we found that people would generate both lists at about the same reaction time. So there was no kind of, oh, I got to wonder if there's anything good about me or if there's anything good about being a college student. So we controlled for that. But what was interesting were the results. When we focus on our uniqueness, and I'll use this bar here or this one here, we become almost twice as lonely as the baseline, and 75% or 125% more lonely than the social identity group. However, when we focus on who we are as a member of some group, a member of some part of who we are, not only are we less lonely than baseline, but we're less lonely than when we focus on ourselves in a positive way. Okay. So what can we give some meaning behind this? We know that individuals who focus on their social identities tend to be better off. For example, studies dealing with Native American youth, where the Native American youth reject their identity as Native American, they tend to have higher rates of drug and alcohol use, higher rates of school dropout, higher rates of unemployment, and all of those types of things. Okay. When we look at elderly people or older people, I shouldn't say elderly people, when people start to disengage in retirement and they disengage from their workforce and their identity as an employee or a professor or an engineer or whatever it may be, the loneliness goes up and the risk for suicide goes up. In fact, the highest level of suicide tends to be men who are going through the retirement years. And the main theory is because they're disengaging from all the identities that had made them up to that point, because it's time to retire them, as if you want to use that term. Okay. So what are some things then that we can say that loneliness really predicts and whatnot in a little bit more detail? Okay. This circular motion is known as the failure to belong circle or cycle. Okay. And it starts with this top one right here, where we experience some type of denial or loss of one's social identity. Maybe we lose someone that was close to us. Maybe we get fired from a job. Maybe we're rejected from a group that was close to us. Later in the semester, I'll talk about college football players and what happens when they don't go on to the NFL or bigger universities. And we'll talk about this a little bit more when we get to that development section. Okay. Well, what we tend to experience is we start to question, who do I belong and where do I belong? One being emotional loneliness, the other one being social loneliness. Okay. And if these don't become resolved, we go through what's called a failure to survive. Okay. Which, if extended on and on, leads to lower mortality and lower morbidity. Now, I want to pause right here and just really focus on what does extended loss and loneliness and loss of identity really do to the body. Okay. Well, loneliness is a just as good, if not better, predictor of your mortality, how long you'll live, and your morbidity, the probability of getting some chronic illness. Okay. It's a better predictor than your eating habits, your exercise habits, your smoking habits. In fact, 1 week of severe loneliness is like smoking, I believe it's 4 packs of cigarettes. Okay. So we're putting ourselves at risk, and I'll kind of explain why this is. When we're finding on the biological level that when there's extended periods of loneliness in a person's life, loss of identity, loss of who a person is based on who they belong to or belong with, it actually starts to affect the genetic code dealing with our immune system. And what it does is it genetically actually starts to lessen immunity responses and immunity strength. And if you want to think about it this way, it's kind of like, well, the body, if you're not going to use your social brain, if you're not going to stay connected with life, then the body has to do what it does when you're starving it to death or when you're not nourishing it correctly. Okay. And that's kind of the current idea. And this is why this is called the failure to survive area. Now, if we extend this on, these are all of the things that we have found that lack of identity and loneliness lead to. We'll see here in a minute that it is a major contributor to suicide, addiction, relationships problems, chronic homelessness, disorders such as depression, criminal behavior, aggression towards society and others, and gang affiliation. And this is just the short list. These are the things that tend to be well researched and well understood in the guise of what happens when we lose connection with the people we belong to, or we want, or we have in our life that are important. Okay. So this is something to consider when you're looking at who am I as an individual, while you're going through this education exploration and really trying to figure out is how do you make sure that you maintain connection not only with other people in a physical, emotional sense, but internally as part of who you are as a human being. Okay. So now it is important because when we get to social psychology, with every good thing, there's usually a bad thing. And that is similar with social identity. And I'm not going to spend too much time on this because we will talk a lot about it when we get to social psychology, when we talk about discrimination and prejudice and all of those kinds of things. But I should note that social identity theory as a theory, when it was being formulated in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, was not actually really done to see the positive aspects of it. That's only happened in the last couple decades. Social identity theory actually was developed to show how people can become prejudiced and discriminatory towards people who are not like them. So I'm going to rehearse this right here, but just like I did with the mental health and mental illness part, I'm going to leave a large part of it for when we get to that section in social psychology. Okay. So the idea is that it comes from this social identity theory comes from two other types of lines of research called social comparison theory and self-esteem. Okay. The self-esteem part is that we like to think well of ourselves. We like to think that we're a good, deserving individuals. Okay. I hope, anyways, that I hope you all feel that way. Okay. But because we like to think good of ourselves, we, by extension, those are our identities that we have with other people, or what we call our in group. Okay. So we like to think well of ourselves. And by extension, if I consider myself a college student, I want to think college students are good people. If I identify myself as male, men are good people. And by extension, those who are not, the out groups, then I have to do something with. Okay. So, and that's exactly what we do. We compare ourselves to different, and by extension, others or out groups. In this comparison process, we tend to do two types of comparisons. One is downward comparison, where we look at groups who we think are quote unquote inferior or less than ours, and that makes us feel better about ourself. Okay. And we also do what's called upward comparison, where we compare ourselves to maybe a majority group or a dominant group. And we then look at ways we can say that maybe they're in the wrong or they're in the right, and how I come about dealing with that anxiety of being different from a dominant, more dominant group that we assume are more dominant. Okay. And so, again, when we get to social psychology, we will detail these things out more and more. But these are the basis for what we call prejudice and discrimination. And we will see things when we get to that section dealing with what's called stereotype threat, where we will behave in a given way if we feel our identity is being threatened to fit to some stereotype, a form of prejudice and discrimination in and of itself. But I just want to emphasize this because it's important to have a really good, healthy identity and really good ties with our in group. But in that, because, and I'm just going to emphasize this, there is health benefits. Okay. There is health benefits to having a connection with people who you feel you are close to. But on the flip side, we also have to allow other people to have connections with who they are with. And so we'll talk about this part of social identity more closely when we get to that section, and how maybe we can manage this in a more productive and healthy way. Hopefully. What I want to do for now is just wrap up our section on this and kind of go over some of the current research findings that tend to that we have found over the last few years. I need to start including a few from 24, and we've already have a few from 25 coming out. But these tend to be some of the findings that we recently are seeing a movement in this understanding of identity and loneliness. Okay. One question is, especially in a country like ours, is what happens when people have two competing social identities? So you can think about being kind of stretched to either act on what you feel is culturally and appropriate for as a Native American and a member of your tribe, versus being a part of the dominant, more individualistic, if you want to put it those terms, consumeristic natures of the more broader culture here in the United States. And yes, you can imagine, I'm sure maybe all of you have probably experienced this, there's always times where it's friction between who I should be and who I feel I shouldn't be. Okay. Well, it's kind of interesting what happens when we're in a moment of conflict is we found that individuals in moments of conflict have difficulty planning for the future events, and being able to see beyond the current moment. They get we if you want to think about it, individuals when we have this kind of frozen in time stance to where planning and the ability to see a good future and all of those things stop to be so easy to find and see. Okay, which if you want to think about this is often why individuals tend to get stuck in a basic cycle of day-to-day living or thriving instead of surviving. Or no, it's you surviving and not thriving. Okay, so just some things to consider when we look at especially currently with a lot of Native American youth who feel this conflict between being part of quote unquote the popular culture or wanting to be a part of their Native American community, and understanding that they can get stuck in not being able to plan for their own future and the ability to move forward. And providing that sense of identity would be the most beneficial thing. Okay, some other things. We found that for the most part, not all, and I want to state this very clearly, but the majority of suicides we have found after reviews done in 2023, that suicide, the formula tends to be depression plus loneliness. Now, with that being said, and I want to make it very clear, there are other reasons individuals and their own life. And I want to make that very clear. Chronic illness, chronic pain, those kind of things can always lead to someone wanting to end their life. But for a good majority, at least greater than 50%, we have found that it is this depression, loneliness combination. So for example, well, even when we look at natural death, and we look specifically at men, most good majority, the average male will pass away within 12 months of their partner's death. Okay. But just to kind of show, give a simple, it's not a simple example, but a kind of an easy kind of example to understand this paradigm is some researchers went to emergency rooms, okay? And they were specifically looking at two type of people. They were looking at people who went to the emergency room because they simply could not manage their depressive symptoms anymore. Their depressive symptoms just got so difficult that they just couldn't handle it. But they weren't admitted because they had suicidal ideology, okay? And then we went and looked at individuals who were admitted to the ER who were there because they had a suicidal attempt, okay? And we gave them, again, two types of measures. We gave them a measure of depression and we gave them a measure of loneliness. And then there was a bunch of others that we did to control for different variables. But what we found is that individuals who were admitted to the hospital just because they couldn't handle their symptoms anymore measured high in depression, but they measured average in loneliness or less. It was only the individuals who went into the ER that went because they did an attempt. They measured both high in depression and high in loneliness. Okay. So there's some current research looking at that a lot closer. One of the areas that, we can learn from Native American psychology that is really being explored is understanding the individual's narrative story. that led them to these 2 points in their life where they were significantly at that point. So we'll talk a little bit of, I think I actually posted that study in the announcements if anybody, no, I didn't, that was a different one. But we'll look at that a little bit closer when we get to, again, abnormal psychology. In 2023, Zhang found that eczema and loneliness, one before the other, that's what these little arrows mean, kind of, leads to non-suicidal self-injury in adolescence. This is when an adolescent harms themselves through high-risk physical activity or through cutting behaviors or through some type of injurious type of behavior that is not associated with trauma, okay? So I want to make that very clear. This is a non-association with trauma because we know a lot of people with trauma, ADHD, and all of those that heightens the probability of self-injury in adolescence. Okay, but what Zhang found is there's this population that has what's called eczema, which eczema is the inability to properly understand the emotional states of other people, and at the same time don't understand their own emotional reaction to the individuals as well. It's as if the connection between emotions and feelings, the interpretation of emotions, it doesn't exist. They just have a hard time understanding emotions of others and their own emotional reaction to others or of themselves. Okay, we find that this combined with loneliness explains a lot of self-injury behavior in adolescence. Okay, outside of those who have experienced, like I said, trauma or suffer from other disorders that can lead to self-harming behaviors. Okay. This is kind of cool. Yerk found an increase in social connection and decreasing in loneliness in middle school, reduces dropout rates in high school. So what this study was, this was kind of a cool study, is they kind of randomly assigned middle schools to two kind of conditions. One condition, they just maintained the traditional middle school kind of thing. The other ones focused on identity and connection. So they focused on reducing loneliness among students by having social groups and understanding connections. In the classroom, there was much more focus on the students interacting with the students than the students interacting with the teacher in learning concepts. They focus on school identity, what it means to, for example, if their middle school mascot is a tiger, what does it mean to be a tiger? And they focused on it much more than they would in a traditional middle school. They created a sense of identity, okay? And what they found is that compared to the regular way we conduct middle school, those that were in those kind of experimental schools had higher rates of graduation. They reduced the dropout rates. In one case, it was decreased dropout rates as much as 50%. Okay, by making students feel like they have a meaning and connection at school, in the classroom, with each other, this created a reduction in dropout rates. Okay. Some other current stuff that has come out is found that older adults who maintain career social connection, often in retirement, live longer and healthier. This I've already expressed earlier in the class about how maintaining a sense of connection with your career and your identity into the retirement years can actually increase how long you live healthier. Jordan found, and this is something that you really should consider, especially those who are do the mindfulness thing and it doesn't help, does the hot tea and the meditation thing and it doesn't help. you do the traditional medications and the traditional therapies, and you're finding that they don't help, is that we have found that social connection, increasing your social connection, even when you don't want to, actually does a better job of self care than any of those other strategies. And I'm going to put this out there, especially in this study and a few studies I've seen. It does better than even this mindfulness stuff that everyone keeps focusing on. Actually, calling someone, going out to coffee with someone, going and joking around with someone, or doing something within that you're identify with. So, for example, when I'm in my very depressive modes, I may go on to my professional websites and start looking around and seeing what other researchers are doing, and that actually reduces my feelings of depression and anxiety. Okay, so something to think about if some of the traditional self-care strategies are not working. And if you want to wonder if, again, going back to indigenous ideology, you wonder why in indigenous communities focus so much on the community rather than the individual in helping someone. I think this is a kind of a proof of that. In fact, it was kind of interesting. There was a tribe in Africa, and I apologize, I'll remember their names when we get to this section later on, where they had traditional European counselors because the community did have, levels of depression and anxiety, and they tried to implement Western techniques for therapy. And within 3 weeks, the tribal elders went in and they kicked them all out. They said, "Get out of here. We don't want you here." And when the researcher went in and said, "Hey, you kicked out all my therapists that came here to help you guys out," the elders simply said, "Well, your thing that you do is strange and foreign to us, because it doesn't make sense that someone who is suffering from depression, you take them into a room with just one individual that is all enclosed, and it's just those two, and they're supposed to heal from that interaction with just one individual in a closed environment. Where for us, healing happens when you're with your people out in nature, in the sunlight, and all of those kinds of things." And I think that story emphasizes what Jordan found in his research in 2023. And I'll get to that later on when we get to brain development. But I did want to stop here, and I'm going to stop our